Good afternoon, everybody. Hope you can hear me. Welcome to this very exciting workshop. Hope you're enjoying Watershed 2020 so far. My name is Robert Case. I'm the chair of the board of the Wellington Water Watchers, and I have the honor of being your host for this particular session. Hopefully someone will interrupt me if this is not going the way I think it is. We're very pleased today to be joined by MPPs and environment leaders of all of the four political parties represented in the Ontario legislature, including our current Minister of Environment, Conservation and Parks. I will introduce each of them as we get there in a moment. As you may remember from the beginning of this, from the opening of Watershed, that one of our objectives of the People's Water Campaign is to ensure that water protection is a priority for the Ontario government now, after the next election, and in future governments as well. And towards that end, we are developing a coordinated campaign around a set of action items that we're calling watershed priorities. So over the summer, some of you will have been part of this, but over the summer we interviewed just about 30 different organizations involved in water protection all around Ontario. We'll share the results of that in the coming months, and we're going to use that to develop a clear list of water protection priorities around which we can all kind of campaign together. But we also, from that, we drew 10 questions that we sent in advance to our political representatives who are here with us today. The People's Water Campaign itself is nonpartisan in terms of political parties. If anything, we're partisan in favor of water, and we'll be coordinating public demands. At least the hope is to help to coordinate and stimulate public demands that water be protected, be a channel for that sort of advocacy by people across the province. So we have asked each of the four MPPs here today to address those 10 questions that came out of those interviews. And they're roughly organized around four themes that emerge out of those interviews. And so one is inherent treaty and legal responsibilities to support First Nation water quality, quantity, and security. Second theme is supporting clean water and watershed integrity. A third theme we asked about has to do with land use, development, and water protection. And another one that we asked about has to do with large-scale dumping of contaminated soil and its impacts on water integrity. There should be, I'm told, a way that you can see the questions via the chat box. There should be a link there to the questions if you want to see what the questions look like. I should point out that this session is not intended to be a debate format. It's not intended to be a debate format. This online platform doesn't really lend itself all that well to the traditional question and answer from the audience. So we have devised the following process. This is how it's going to go. So each MPP will have 10 minutes to make a statement responding whatever way they want to those 10 questions. We ask that audience members not make comments in the chat box during that session, just listen. Following the four presentations, so after all four are done, there'll be a 15-minute period where we're going to ask all of you, audience members, to pose questions or make comments in the chat box to share with each other. So the MPPs will be part of observing those questions. They'll be able to read them and see them, but we're not really expecting them to respond to them, at least here and now. They can certainly use them for policy development into the future, but the idea is not to elicit a direct response to them. It's to share our observations with each other, our reactions, and for the MPPs to see what those reactions look like. Then following that 15-minute chat, I'll try to highlight some of the themes that come out of it with the help of Wellington Water Watchers Campaign Director Mike Balkwell. Just highlight some of those themes and then turn it back to the MPPs, who will each have 2 minutes to make a concluding comment. The session is being recorded and copies will be made available to you once we're done with this here. So with the order that we're going to take is we'll start with Mr. Urick if he's logged in here, and then we'll be hearing from Ian Arthur of the NDP, Lucille Collard from the Liberals, and then Mike Schreiner from the Greens, and then we will be returning back for closing comments in the opposite order. So if Mr. Urick could press the tab that says asked to join audio and video, I can bring you online here and introduce you. That was right. I saw you for a second. There we go. Okay, so let me introduce you and then I'll give you your 10 minutes. So thank you very much for joining us, Minister Urick. Jeff Urick is a progressive conservative MPP for Elgin Middlesex in the London area. And he is indeed Ontario's Minister of the Environment, Conservation and Parks. So welcome, Minister Urick. You'll have 10 minutes and I'm going to go off screen. When you see me come back on screen, that signals that you have 30 seconds to tie up loose ends and then close it off for the next person. So thank you again, and over to you.
Thanks very much, Rob. And it's grateful to be here at Watershed 2020. And I do want to commend the organizers for putting together a strong agenda and exploring some of the most important issues facing our province. Our environment, as anyone would argue, is vital to the quality of life that we all enjoy. And it provides the water we drink, the air we breathe, as well protects the land and green spaces that fosters a healthy lifestyle and goes to support the traditional Indigenous practices. Just as important is an Ontario where all people have a responsibility to help protect our environment, help protect our environmental legacy, and all that we do and say. Today, I'd like to talk to you about the commitment our government has made in our Made in Ontario Environment Plan to ensure that waters in Ontario are managed properly and that all Ontarians share equally in the benefits and responsibilities associated with those well-protected waters. Any discussion on Ontario's water bounty should begin with the Great Lakes. Their beauty and immensity are only matched by their economic and social significance. The Great Lakes contain about 20% of the world's fresh water, and its basin is home to more than 4,000 species of plant, fish, and wildlife. More than 105 people live within the Great Lakes region, including 99% of Ontario's population. With a GDP of more than $6 trillion US, this region is the engine driving the Canadian and American economies. And if it were a separate country, its economy would be the third largest in the world. Concerted actions by governments, communities, and other partners have led to significant improvements in the Great Lake water quality, including a 90% reduction in discharges of dioxins, mercury, and PCBs into our lakes. This has led to fish that are safer to eat, restored species, and the rehabilitation of numerous polluted areas. These are tremendous gains, and they just show what we can achieve when we bring everybody together. Much of our work to address these issues is being coordinated through the Canadian-Ontario Agreement on Great Lakes Water Quality and Ecosystem Health. This enables the Ontario and Canadian governments to work with local partners to address the most significant issues facing the Great Lakes. Next year, in 2021, this will mark the 50th anniversary of the COA. A new draft agreement was negotiated in the summer of 2019 and focuses on improving watershed and stormwater management, reducing pollution, and restoring some of our most degraded areas of concern. It includes a new emphasis on reducing road salt and plastics entering the lakes. We are now in the final stages of completing these negotiations with Canada. Earlier this month, I announced 3 funding initiatives for actions to restore and protect the Great Lakes. This funding included $7.47 million investment in projects to help address harmful pollutants, excess nutrient levels, and increases in invasive species. Of this $7.47 million, $5.8 million is being provided to fund 65 new Great Lakes projects run by communities, Indigenous communities, universities, and other organizations. This work includes a pilot at 2 Toronto beaches to reduce the time it takes to test water quality from 24 hours to 4 hours, finalizing a plan to remove the breakwater barrier at Chippewa Park in Thunder Bay to improve the natural water circulation manage pollutants, and repurpose the breakwater material to create fish habitat. The implementation of contaminant reduction practices in key watersheds such as Garvey Glen, Lambton Shores, and Main Bayfield to improve nearshore water quality, and monitoring water quality to see if low impact development and agricultural best practices used by greenhouses in the Leamington-Kingsville area are reducing excess nutrients from entering Lake Erie. Finally, to further protect and restore the Great Lakes and support Ontario's recovery from COVID-19, we are investing up to $1.67 million through our new Great Lakes Local Action Fund for projects led by community-based organizations, small businesses, municipalities, conservation authorities, and Indigenous communities. Each project is eligible up to $50,000 to support work protecting and restoring coastal, shoreline, and nearshore areas of the Great Lakes and its tributaries. Information about applying is now online, and the deadline is on November 6th of this year. I'd also now like to turn to investments we made to protect Lake Simcoe, another lake that plays an integral role in the life of our province. This summer, we announced investments we are continuing to make to reduce phosphorus and other pollutants entering the lake. This work builds on the progress outlined in the 10-year report on Lake Simcoe, which we released earlier this summer. The report highlights a broad range of actions underway by the province and our partners to address the challenges facing the watershed. After a decade of sustained effort, we are making progress. For example, phosphorus loads from sewage treatment plants have been reduced by 50% since 2009. And although phosphorus loads have been high in recent years, phosphorus concentrations in the lake have been consistently low over the past 6 years. The amount of algae in the lake has also decreased since 2009. But more importantly, we're seeing improvements in dissolved oxygen levels in the lake's deep waters, which helps support a self-sustaining cold-wish community. And we're continually seeing signs of naturally reproducing cold water species such as lake trout and lake whitefish. In the coming months, we'll be inviting a wide range of partners, including stakeholders, Indigenous communities, and the public, to participate in a 10-year review of the Lake Simcoe Protection Plan. The review will help us ensure the plan adapts over time and meet existing challenges and address emerging threats. Of course, we're also concerned with water quantity. To further ensure our water resources are protected and used sustainably, we are seeking input from a set of enhancements that we have proposed to Ontario's water taking program, which include requiring water bottling companies to have the support of their host municipalities for new and increased bottled water takings with an exemption for small businesses, establishing priorities of water use in the province that can guide water taking decisions, assessing and managing multiple water takings together in areas of the province where we have concerns about water sustainability, and making sure the process is transparent by making water taking data available to the public. And you may recall that last fall, we extended our moratorium for new and increased bottled water takings. This enabled us to complete a thorough review of the province water taking policy, program, and science tools, and to get an independent third party to review our findings so that we could be sure that we get it right. The reviewer validated our findings that water takings for bottling are being managed sustainably in Ontario and are not affecting the sustainability of our groundwater resources. We are also just finishing an engagement on a proposal to extend the current moratorium on new and increased water takings from groundwater sources by water bottling facilities for an additional 6 months until April 1st, 2021. This extension would give us time to thoroughly review and consider the feedback received this summer on our proposed enhancements to Ontario's water taking program. We'll also further engage the public, stakeholders, and Indigenous communities on how we can implement these proposed enhancements before the moratorium ends. As a final note, I want to recognize how vital it is to have access to clean drinking water. Ontario's drinking water is among the best protected in the world as a result of our comprehensive protection framework that helps safeguard the province's drinking water. However, we do have to recognize that there is more work to be done to ensure that First Nation communities can also depend on clean drinking water. That's why we're continuing our collaboration with First Nations and Canada to support the resolution of long-term drinking water advisories and to support the long-term safety and sustainability of water infrastructure in these communities. So I just want to take the time to thank everyone for listening. I hope I've given you a good sense of Ontario's top water priorities. And I want to emphasize one point. Success depends on our ability to work together and get everyone involved in taking action to protect the water resources that we all rely on. So thank you very much for having me here today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Yorick. And I have to comment that you're even under time, which is amazing. So thank you for that. I am going to mute. Okay, so bring up our next representative. If I can work with technology, should be Ian. Oh no, I'm sorry. Ian Arthur is next, and I think I clicked the wrong button and lost you. There we go.
Now I'm here.
Okay, good, amazing.
The blue button popped right back up as soon as you.
Okay, I'm glad.
Yeah.
The same format. I'm going to. This is Ian Arthur, New Democratic Party, MPP for Kingston and the Islands, and among various other roles, the environment critic for the official opposition. So welcome, Mr. Arthur. Thanks a lot. You have 10 minutes, and then if I pop up on the screen, that means you have 30 seconds left to wrap things up.
I've got a timer going here on my phone already.
Okay, great. So do I. Over to you.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and it's a pleasure to join you all remotely from my home office here in Kingston, Ontario, and it's really great to get to be part of this event. It's the first year I've had an opportunity to be part of this Watershed event, and I'm honored to have the opportunity to speak. Before we get going, I do want to acknowledge that not speaking, but in the audience right now is Sandy Shaw, my colleague in the NDP caucus, and she recently tabled the Coots Paradise Water Accountability Act, which would make the ministry tell the public when there's spills into watersheds that the public has a right to know about, so that there can be collaborative, as the minister just said, responses to these events. And this was in response to the sewage that was leaked over a long period of time in Hamilton. And the public had no knowledge of that. So it's a fantastic bill, and I do hope that we see it passed and move forward in the legislature, and that the ministry adopts that going forward. I really like the emphasis of the questions today and the focus on Indigenous, the role of Indigenous people in water taking across Ontario, and the role that they have to play in it. And it's something that I think is close to all of the hearts of NDP MPPs, but in particular because we work with Saul Mamakwa, who is Ontario's first First Nations MPP, and it brings it home when you have to listen to his stories and realize what those communities are facing. You begin to kind of, in a very emotional and heartfelt way, understand the significance of these issues and why they need to be priorities. And I think it's fantastic. So thank you to the Wellington Water Watchers for incorporating those questions into today and for the emphasis on them. And I'm going to do my best to try and engage on those in a meaningful way and tell you our views on some of them. So I do want to start with the question about what is our position on Bill 76. I think that's fairly obvious. It was introduced by an NDP MPP, and that's for the Ontario legislature to bring into law the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, and to make sure Ontario's laws align with that. And this would be a dynamic and world-changing piece of legislation if it was, in how we interact with First Nations in pursuing reconciliation, meaningful reconciliation with these communities, and beginning to build a better way of doing things in collaboration with them. And you know, with all due respect to the minister, we have 5 key questions on Indigenous issues in front of us, and other than a rather tokenistic line in the first sentence about working with Indigenous people, none of them were addressed. And I'd like to see more. I think it's important that we see more. I think that, you know, this adoption of Bill 76 would be a tremendous step forward for the legislature, and it would change how we pass legislation in Ontario. and it would provide for a level of stewardship of our water resources and our environment that we have not had in a very long time. And I think that's all the more important as we face the implications of climate change. We need to design policy that is not only provides the protection we need for right now, but provides the protection we need for a changing climate and a changing Ontario going forward. We can't think about source water protection in the context of the next 5 years or 10 years. We have to think about it in the context of the next 50 and the next 100 years, and look at the changes that are coming and the extra care that we need to take right now to make sure that those resources are protected moving forward. And the adoption of UNDRIP would be a huge step in this direction. And I want to take a minute to talk about what it's like to work with salt, because I think this, and it does relate to water, because I have an amazing caucus and it's an honor to work with him, but he uniquely has this ability to silence the legislature, to bring forward these points. He's the only person when he stands up in the legislature that everyone is silent. And he has this presence and he commands this level of attention, which is inspiring. And he speaks and he asks for these things, and almost none of them come to fruition. But he comes back week after week to the to the legislature, which is a colonial institution, and it enforces our colonial legacy. And he tries to work within that system to provide meaningful change going forward. But then he leaves, and on his weekends, when I get to come back to Kingston, he goes home and he faces a level of tragedy and hardship that is unimaginable that it actually continues to exist in Ontario. He goes to visit Kisheshewan, where the community is forced to leave their houses every year because of their flooding and molding homes, or Bearskin Lake, where he has to speak to the family of a 13-year-old girl who committed suicide, who had never in her life had clean drinking water. 13 years old, and she had never had access to clean drinking water. Or he goes to visit Grassy Narrows, where 90% of the population is living with the effects of mercury poisoning. If you want to see the importance of why we need to source water protection, why we need to fundamentally protect the water resources that we have in the most aggressive way that we possibly can, look to the experiences of First Nations communities across Ontario. They will tell you why we need to do more and why we need to protect it. And it will also illustrate the double standard that we have, and frankly, two types of Canadian citizens. And I remember when I grew up in Sydenham, which is north of Kingston. And while we were living there, we had a municipal water system installed. We had a municipal water system installed because 3 wells came back bad. And the council decided that it was, that was an unacceptable level of contamination in wells, and that we were going to need to move really rapidly to institute a municipal water. 3 wells over the course of a couple of years, and immediately system change. And then when we look at First Nations, and unfortunately there's some horrible jurisdictional ping pong that happens between the federal and provincial governments, but I don't really have time for that, because they're citizens of Canada. And just do it. Just install those systems, do what you need to do to provide clean drinking water. It's shameful that it's 2020, and this is a conversation I remember having when I was in elementary school. So we need to do better on it. And again, thank you for bringing these questions forward. And I think what I've said so far kind of answers some of the other questions that were there, in terms of the provisions from free, prior, and informed consent of Indigenous peoples for water extractions, and bottling companies. Of course, they should have free, prior, and informed consent. It's in the United Nations Declaration. It's in the recommendations from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It needs to be incorporated into the decisions we made. I think that there's a hard conversation to be had about what we need to give up in order to honor these things. And you need to have a realization that things are going to be different, and that a lot of things are actually going to be a lot more difficult to accomplish. But you can't lean on saying, well, we need progress. We need to build and we'll work around that, or we'll come back to it later. You actually have to do it right from the beginning, and it's going to be complicated, and it's going to be significantly more difficult than what we have tried to do previously. But I think it is fundamental to how we view ourselves as Canadians and what we need to do going forward. We have never shied away from hard work. And we need to be able to do that here, and to have that self-reflection, to understand that maybe we won't have access to all the things we had access before if we honor our commitments. And that's, it takes some self-reflection, it takes some selflessness and giving things up, but it is fundamentally important for how we hold ourselves, both here at home and on the international stage. So yeah, absolutely. And the idea of nation to nation negotiations, that we're beginning to see more of that. I'm just did a course at Queen's on mining projects, and they talked about agreements for the expansion of mine around Timmins, and there was meaningful nation to nation negotiation that went on there, and that is a step in the right direction. Now we need to apply that for all across Ontario in respect to every treaty that we have and that was signed, and that Ontario needs to honor and Canada needs to honor. So it's something that we've played around the edges of. We need to do a lot better of a job at doing that meaningfully. Oh, there's my 30-second warning. It goes so fast. And then, yeah, okay, I guess I'm really just out of time. The Lake Simcoe question, the statutory review, I'd like to see a meaningful review by the government, and I'd like it to listen to citizen input. You can't take the citizen input, accept it, and then write what you were going to write anyway. It needs to meaningfully reflect the priorities of the people who live around Lake Simcoe, and I'll finish on that because I know I'm out of time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Arthur, and it's tempting, and as it was with Mr. Yerrick, for me to launch into a conversation with you. I'd love to be able to do that, but that's not the format, and I'm going to say thank you for now. We'll bring you back for 2 minutes of sort of closing statement shortly. But for now, let's see if we can get this correct. Let's turn to our next representative. I welcome Lucille Collard, Liberal, MPP for Ottawa-Vanier. She is also the spokesperson for the Ontario Liberal Caucus on, it sounds like, a number of portfolios, including environment, parks, and conservation. So welcome and nice to meet you. The time is yours, and I'll see you in 9 minutes and 30 seconds.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I want to thank the organizers for such a relevant event and for inviting me as a newly elected MPP. So I will start by saying that I'm not yet an expert on this, but I'm still getting better educated on these issues. My interest for environment goes way back. I think it's always been on my mind, and even more so because I have 4 children, and they remind me every day how important it is to protect, their planet of tomorrow. I want also to say that I was a school trustee for 10 years, and I was very motivated by the school board that I work with. They had the project to obtain the ISO 14001 certification, which they did obtain in 2016 when I was actually vice chair of the board, and they were the first school board in North America to gain that certification, and it was something to be very proud of. Personally, I've always been mindful and careful about the environment, and I guess that's why we have solar panels on the roof of our house and that I drive an electric car. And it's also to be an example for my children. Lately, I've been attending the sessions on the protection of our Great Lakes. So the importance of protecting our source of water is, very important. It's very much on the mind of a lot of people. So I appreciate what I've learned taking part in this convention, because I had to do a bit of digging, and so that's part of my education, and I look forward to working on more of these important issues beyond this forum. So to speak on the subject of this convention of the Watershed 2020, I'll offer the following remarks, which are from my perspective. So regarding the treaty and legal responsibility to support First Nation water security, I would say that Access to good water is, in my view, a basic human right, and government needs to play their part to ensure that everyone has access to safe drinking water. This includes many Indigenous communities that do not have safe access to drinking water. Such conditions are an examples of the deteriorating water conditions that need to be addressed and prevented in the future. Ontario's approach to Indigenous relations and reconciliation should reflect the principles of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. These principles are rooted in a commitment to establish and maintain constructive, cooperative relationship based on mutual respect. As the federal government moves forward on its national plan to implement the declaration, Ontario would also have a role to play. In Ontario, Bill 76, as was mentioned earlier, is a concrete move to implement the principles of the declaration. Its intent shows a willingness to ensure better collaborations with our Indigenous communities. So I do look forward to discussing further the content of the bill when it comes up for third reading debate at the legislature. I would actually be interested in hearing also from the Indigenous leaders to ensure that we have their perspective about the best way of moving forward. Government needs to work alongside Indigenous communities across our province and across our country in an harmonized way to move forward together. Now, on supporting clean water and watershed integrity, to offer the support, we need to take action province-wide, since many of us share the same watershed. Our role to support clean water and watershed integrity is to ensure that regulations are put in place to uphold all Ontarians and companies to act responsibly. For example, the Clean Water Act of 2006 was a good initiative by the Liberal Party to start a process of protecting our water supplies. In order to be effective, however, the Act must be properly enforced, adequately funded, and work in conjunction with source water protection legislation. And ultimately, we need to collaborate with municipalities so that we can work towards solutions that work across jurisdiction, because water protection is everybody's business. The bottom line is that ensuring watershed integrity ensures that we will have access to clean water for generations to come. And that should be a priority if we care about the future generations. Therefore, giving the proper support for clean water and watershed integrity should never be juggled with economic consideration. It must be about supporting clean water and watershed integrity. I will admit, however, that being a newly elected MPP, I have not had the chance to dig in deeper into the ramifications and impacts of the current legislation, so I actually look forward to learning more. As for including private owners within the Clean Water Act, I know that there is an ongoing application for review of the Act and that the question is being raised. To the extent that a negative impact on the environment can be demonstrated, it would make absolute sense to impose some control measures to protect the environment. I think that the proposition being made that wells that serve facilities such as schools or social care facilities should be subject to some control measures. And it's not unreasonable, especially when the objective is to protect the health of our communities. Therefore, the decision should be based on what is best for the environment and what can we do to protect the health of Ontarians. Another good example of water protection measure to ensure the good health of our communities is the Lake Simcoe Protection Plan, which is up for its 10-year review process. Having such a review process will let us know exactly where we are in the recovery process and hear from the community and experts about it. The plan was an amazing initiative that the Liberal government at the time put in place after hearing from advocates in the community. The most important thing during this review process is to strengthen the protection plan and improve it. I will be very vocal to ensure the government keeps investing to reduce phosphorus loads and reduce the environmental stress on the lakes. We need bold actions, and more importantly, we need to listen to what the community and the experts have to say. An open process would ensure collaboration between the government and civil society. In the end, it is our government responsibility to ensure that such a protection plan succeeds and to put the necessary measures in place to ensure that. Going forward, we also need to think about prevention. We need to take a good look at the root causes, ensure that and ensure that this situation doesn't repeat itself elsewhere in the province and continue to protect other lakes and watershed. Now, I will speak a little bit to the land use development, water protection, and large-scale dumping of contaminated soil. So one of the places that we need to focus our attention to better prevent such destruction of our watersheds is our urban development. Construction, land use and development, and contaminated soil removal can have impacts on the environment if it's not executed properly. So stronger environmental impact assessments related to all construction permits, including the effect on the surrounding areas, is crucial for such prevention. We need to ensure that land is used responsibly with a forward-looking mindset in regard to the environment. Cutting corners might save a few dollars in the short run, but will have lasting and devastating long-term impacts that far exceed the short-term gains. Specifically regarding large-scale dumping, the most dangerous part is the unknown factor. So if we're not entirely informed about potential contamination for such dumping, we won't be able to prevent or mitigate the effects. A more comprehensive framework of regulations will not necessarily mean that it will be more complicated to remove the soil from development site, but will ensure that we do it in an educated way. We need to understand what potential impact the soil intended to be transported may have on the environment before it is too late to take proper precautionary measures. In this scenario, regulations will ensure that we know exactly what is going on and can deal properly with the complications before they happen. Better environmental strategies need to be in place to ensure that the negative impact is minimized as much as possible in a controlled manner. So I'm probably close to my 10 minutes limit, and I will thank everybody for their participation to this very important forum, and I look forward to more discussions in the.
Thank you very much, Ms. Collard, and we'll have you back again for a 2-minute wrap-up after some discussion, after our fourth panelist, and then some discussion with the audience. So let me bring up Mike Schweiner. Coming up on screen, there we go. Mike Schweiner is MPP, Green Party for Guelph, Ontario, and leader of the Green Party of Ontario. Hi, Mike, and over to you, and I'll see you in 9 minutes and 30 seconds.
Great. Well, thanks, Rob, for the kind introduction. And just want to say good afternoon to everyone, and what an honor it is to join so many water protectors today. I'm speaking from Guelph, and as a settler on this land, I want to express my gratitude and recognize that we are on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Adirondack peoples. And today, Guelph is home to a number of Métis, Inuit, and First Nations people. Guelph is located on the treaty land of the New Credit First Nation and is covered under Treaty 3, the Between the Lakes Purchase. And I'm just so grateful to the many Indigenous people who've taught me the importance of learning from elders about how to care for the land and water and all the creatures who inhabit this land, and to apply those lessons to care for this place in a way that honors the next 7 generations. And these lessons have profound implications for how we care for water. I believe access to clean water is a human right that not only applies to those living today, but also to the future generations to follow. We all have a sacred duty to protect water. And that's why I want to extend a heartfelt thanks to organizations like Wellington Water Watchers and others for the work you do as water protectors. I also believe that government has a sacred duty to protect water. To manage water as a public trust in the public interest, from boil water advisories in First Nations communities to below the water table aggregate extraction in the Greenbelt to algae blooms in the Great Lakes, we must do more to live up to our sacred duty to protect water. I've spent much of my career working with community organizations to change laws that give priority to aggregate extraction over land use and water protection. As Ontario's first Green MPP, I worked hard to remove Schedule 10 of Bill 66 that threatened to undermine the Greenbelt and source water protection. And I oppose the Ford government's move in Bill 132 to remove the ability of municipal governments to place restrictions on below the water table aggregate extraction and to lower fines for toxic discharge into our waterways. The Association of Municipalities of Ontario was so alarmed by the change to water protections from aggregates that they came to the committee reviewing the bill to ask that the government indemnify municipal councils from their legal obligation to protect water. These moves are wrong, and I think they need to be reversed. And it highlights why we must overhaul the legislation that prioritizes aggregate extraction over other land uses, such as protecting farmland, natural heritage, wetlands, and the Greenbelt. The previous government failed to do this when they reviewed the Aggregate Resources Act, and the current government has further eroded vital water protections. And this to me highlights why it's so essential to understand the connection between land use practices and water protection, especially as we confront the climate crisis. Dismantling the Environmental Assessment Act, along with fast tracking the GTA West 413 highway and changing the growth plan to facilitate sprawl, as the government is proposing right now, not only threatens water recharge areas that are so vital to providing clean drinking water, but it also paves over the Earth's ability to absorb excess water from climate-fueled storms that are leading to more severe flooding. So I believe that approach is environmentally reckless and fiscally irresponsible, and that we need to change and head down a more sustainable path. You know, I hear the Premier oftentimes call regulations that protect water red tape. I call them protecting the people and places we love. And that's why I'm working for stronger regulations that protect our water from aggregate mining, from contaminated soil dumping, from urban sprawl, from excessive use of road salt, from toxic discharge and phosphorus runoff, which especially threatens rivers that flow into the Great Lakes and Lake Simcoe, from the cumulative impacts of commercial water taking, especially in the most vulnerable aquifers that affect both private and municipal wells. And I want to make a special point of the importance of protecting moraines as vital recharge areas. And that's exactly why I introduced the Paris-Galt Marine Conservation Act to protect an important water recharge area in my region of the province. It's built on the historic Oak Ridges Marine Conservation Act, and I hope it'll provide the foundation for a provincial-wide act to protect all moraines in Ontario. As an opposition member, it's my job to hold the government accountable on these issues, but I also think it's important to compliment the government when we make progress on water protections. And so I want to be clear with all of you and with Minister Urick in attendance that I appreciate him meeting with me and listening to many of my suggestions in the proposed water bottling permits and in the extension of the moratorium on new permits. And so I'd like to suggest today to the minister that he make the moratorium on new permits permanent and that he apply the good parts of these regulatory changes to all commercial and industrial water taking permits. The prioritization schedule, prioritizing water for people first, looking at cumulative impacts, using transparent science, and ensuring municipal input into water regulations are incredibly important and vital parts of the new regulation. I would say the most glaring flaw in the new regulations is that First Nations should also be able to have the same input and be able to place the same restrictions on water taking permits as municipalities. That free, informed, and prior consent should be part of the water taking permit process. I want to emphasize today that the process of decolonization and honoring Indigenous rights is part of the process of protecting water. For tens of thousands of years, First Nations across Turtle Island have recognized the sacred duty to protect water for future generations. And we should be guided by Indigenous wisdom and knowledge that water should not be treated and traded like a commodity. Water is sacred. Water is life. And for this reason, I support MPP Mamakwa's Bill 76, calling for the harmonization of Ontario's laws with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. I was going to talk more about what a wonderful role MPP Mamakwa plays at Queen's Park, but MPP Arthur's already done that. So I just want to close by saying that we all benefit from making clean water a human right. This is an issue that transcends partisan politics and speaks to our humanity, our obligation to care for each other. This horrible pandemic we're in has reminded us that we are all in this together and how important it is to work together to protect water as part of building a greener and more caring Ontario. And so I want to thank everyone who's participating in the Watershed 2020 event. I want to thank you for the work you do as water protectors, and I look forward to continuing to work with you to protect our water because it's our sacred duty. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike Schreiner. And I think we've got rich input and challenges from all four of our MPPs and from all four parties. And so what we thought we'd do now is take 15 minutes or so, and we invite you, audience members, to make your comments and raise questions in the chat. This is Mike Balkwill. You may have met him earlier or in other contexts, campaign director for the Wellington Water Watchers. And Mike and I will try to lift up themes from you're seeing in the chat to share back out with for everybody, sort of to hit some highlights. We will take about 15 minutes to have some chat, and then we'll call our panelists representatives back for their closing statements, starting with Mr. Schreiner, reverse order through to Minister Urick has the final 2 minutes of the session. So say what you will now, and let's.
So Rob, while people are putting comments into the chat box, I think I'd just like to say we appreciate the Minister and the environment critics and the opposition members for being here today. It's showing respect for how important water issues are to everyone in Ontario. You've taken our questions seriously, and we appreciate you being here today and the attention that you're giving to this. As Rob says, we're going to lift up some of the comments that we hear in the panel, and this is an opportunity for those of you who are listening to make comments to each other about how you're reacting to what you heard from the representatives of each party. So this is a place where you can share your opinion with each other about what you heard. And if you have additional questions that you would like the representatives to address in their closing comments. So as we watch the comments to see if you have things you want to say to each other, there are some things, the questions that were posed in the earlier part. Would it be okay, Rob, if I brought a couple of those up now?
I was just looking at them myself, and they look good. Yes, so go ahead, please.
So one of the questions that came up is, what about the cuts that have been made to funding for conservation authorities? They have a very important role. And what I'm going to do right now, I'm going to amplify these questions and ask all of our panelists to think which of these they may want to speak to in their 2 minutes. There'll be more than they can speak to in 2 minutes, but they can think if there's one or more of these they want to amplify. So you may want to make a comment on the question to conservation authorities. The province has recently exempted forestry and logging from environmental assessments, which means that mercury release, for example, on human health is not going to be assessed for new forestry, new logging projects. So that's something that somebody might want to comment on. I noticed that the minister, when he spoke, said water is vital to life, which it is, and that subsequently everyone else said that water is a human right. So the minister may wish to comment on whether he too believes water is a human right. Rod Whitlow from Six Nations put a suggestion in the chat box that there be a joint Ontario Environmental Commission that has representatives of First Nations and support to help First Nations to issue their own annual drinking water report. So these are some suggestions that have come up. And Rob, maybe you want to look at some things that have just come in recently and amplify those comments.
There's one a question that catches my mind from Brian Smith, who wonders what actually are the priorities for, we ask these representatives our questions, and so there's sort of a question of what are the greatest threats to ground and surface water that we use to, for drinking water and other uses. So where do the parties and the particular politicians stand on what the priorities are to them, let alone our priorities? So I think that's an interesting question. Katie Krylov, apologies if I'm not saying this correctly, is drawing attention to the need to invest more in wetland evaluations, I guess towards establishing an inventory, and so that they can be properly protected and regulated. Catch anything else in the meantime there, Mike?
Here, I'm talking with my microphone off. Sorry, folks. I just want to say that the moratorium deadline is tomorrow. People can still make comments on that, and appreciated hearing the minister's comments at the top of the presentation that the moratorium will be extended, and his government has paid very careful attention to the science underlying this issue, and is, while there may be individual points on which we still may disagree or have additional comment, they are having a very thoughtful process, and we appreciate the time and attention that's being given to that.
Mike, I did see a comment earlier from Rod Whitlow that might be interesting for people to reflect on, which is about the minister's statement about municipal consent for water taking permits, and the question then became, that's interesting, but no clear statement on where First Nations governments come into this, just municipal kind of settler communities. So I don't know if the people from the different parties have perspectives on that particular type of dilemma.
I see a comment from Harmony asking, how will we assure that Indigenous women and femmes are included in decision-making of holding corporations accountable for not responding to the climate change crisis? And Arlene has entered in the chat box a link where you can make your comment to the ERO in order to extend the moratorium. And Truyens is asking, and the minister may wish to comment on this in his closing comments, when will your government reinstall the Lake Simcoe Protection Plan? And there's a question here too that connects back to the early presentation by Kelsey Linda this morning. How could legislation be tabled to introduce water having legal and natural rights in a more meaningful way? Rob, there's a question with the ARA at the bottom. Do you want to amplify that?
ARA. The question is, do the new ARA policies go far enough to protect source water and our moraines? And the comment is that they do not go far enough. And I think there might be a general interest in knowing where the different parties are going with that particular question.
So I'm watching the clock, Rob, and we're running a little bit ahead of schedule, which is a good thing. So I'm going to propose that we be generous and give all of the our representatives 3 minutes.
3 minutes?
Yeah, like a whole 3 minutes, because there have been many comments made, many suggestions. There were some of the questions that we asked were not answered by all the speakers, so this may give them a chance for a supplementary comment. And so, Rob, I'm kind of through you alerting Mike Schreiner that he's up next, and I'm going to get off screen and leave it for you to transition us for 3 minutes at a time to each speaker. Thank you very much, everybody, for your comments and questions.
We'll give Mr. Schreiner another 30 seconds or so to get ready. I see he's coming up online. Following him, we'll go back to, I believe we go back to Lucille Collard, and then Ian Arthur, and then the minister. And this really not to end this conversation. And again, we set this up so that our representatives aren't expected to directly answer the questions in the chat. The opportunity was for us to tell them what we think, so they can take that into consideration. But of course, they're invited to address them, if any of them, if they want to. But the closing comments weren't expected to be a direct response to this. So we're going to do that then. So let's you can continue to make your chats. I think that'll be interesting to see how that develops. But I'm going to bring up Mike Schreiner, MPP for Guelph and leader of the Green Party, to make start off the closing comments. And you have up to 3 minutes, Mr. Schreiner. So over to you.
Sure, thanks, Rob. So I'm just trying to look at my notes here, what people had to say. And I think I'll start with the comments from Rod Whitlow at Six Nations, which I fully agree with. I brought up in my comments that I thought there were many aspects of the new proposed regulations for water bottling that frankly should apply to all commercial and industrial water taking permits. But I think one of the glaring omissions right now is that the municipal input and the ability for municipalities to say no should apply to First Nations governments as well. And so I'm hoping that that's something that will be updated and addressed in the next iteration of the regulations. And I also thought the idea of a joint First Nations Ontario Water Advisory Committee is a fantastic idea. And I think the more Indigenous knowledge we can have playing a direct role in establishing water legislation, regulations, and rules, the better, given the fact that Indigenous people have been such wonderful stewards of water for thousands and thousands of years. The comment about conservation authorities, I think, is a really important one. Conservation authorities have played a vital role in controlling flooding, in particular in southern Ontario. And we, on a per capita basis, have less flooding costs than many of the other provinces that don't have entities like conservation authorities. And we know that the climate crisis is only going to escalate the risk associated with flooding. And so making sure we have good policies in place to mitigate that risk as much as possible is incredibly important. And I think the environmental assessment process plays an important role in that. And I share the concerns around the changes the government has brought into the EA process, particularly the forestry and logging exemptions. I know the chief of Grassy Narrows First Nation has raised the concern that we could see, issues like the mercury poisoning, which Indigenous people in Grassy Narrows have been dealing with since the late 1960s, and just what a just horrific tragedy that's been. And making sure that things like environmental assessments are there to protect. The precautionary principle is it's kind of look before you leap, and it's designed to avoid those types of tragic outcomes. And I think it's incumbent upon us as government members to, have rules in place that avoid that. And then I think my time is almost up, but I'm just going to conclude by saying that land use practices and the connection to land use practices, the more sprawling subdivisions and things like that we have, that directly impacts water protections. And so making sure we have solid land use practices in place that protect our moraines, protect our wetlands, protect our green space and farmland is vital to water protection. Thank you, everyone, for the great work you're doing. It was a real honor to join you today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Schreiner, Green Party. I guess we'll have is Lucille Collard is still there. If you can find the tab that says access the speaking, I'll bring you up next. I just want to draw attention quickly. Brian Smith has made a comment. There's a theme about red tape, what that means for environmental regulation. And in the comment, Brian Smith offers to share a document that they've created, I guess, through Gravel Watch, and analyzing red tape. And you can email them at info@gravelwatch.org if you're interested in that particular document. Okay, so Lucille Collard, Liberal.
Hey.
Over to you.
Thank you. My concluding remarks will probably be brief because I think I provided a lot of content in my earlier remarks. I do appreciate all the comments in the chat box, and I think the general thinking is that we need to do better. And there's no question that protecting our water is nothing less than vital. And we just need to work together to do the right things. We need to have better collaboration across jurisdiction, collaboration across party lines, and collaboration with our First Nations. I think that, we have to be mindful of the future of the next generations. And, the quality of the water is just so important, right, to our survival. So I'm looking forward to working again in collaboration with the other members of Parliament and the other parties. And I've already started some discussions with them. And I think that, it could be very fruitful. And again, I think we need to do better. And, I want to just conclude on, thanking again the organizers. I think you're doing a fabulous job. I think this is such an important event. And I look forward to hearing about the results of all of these discussions today. And also special thanks to all the participants that are taking a real keen interest in these important issues. So thank you very much. It was a pleasure joining you on this beautiful Saturday morning.
Thank you very much. And I would echo that back to you, Ms. Collard, and all the panelists here for, really bring your A game to this panel. I think we're hearing a lot of interesting perspectives and challenges. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And over to Ian Arthur, if he's there. NDP, critic for the environment, MPP for Kingston and the Islands. Okay, over to you.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you for the contributions from the other contributors. It was great to listen to both MPP Collard and Mr. Schreiner. And, one of the nice things about being in the legislature is when you do find common ground with people from other parties. And consistently, I will say that working with MPP Schreiner on environmental issues, on fighting back against Schedule 10, which was frankly one of the greatest environmental victories that Ontario has had against this government, and Bill 132 is certainly an honor to get to do that, to fight back and to share those values with other members of the legislature. I want to end by saying that it's not just about not undoing kind of more of those protections, which is unfortunately where I believe that this government is headed. They do view environmental protections as red tape and something to be gotten out of the way. But there is a desperate need to actually do better at it and have better protections, be it for source water, wetlands, floodplains, all of those things. And so far what we have seen is cuts to conservation authorities, and their funding should be reinstated. It is integral to the health of our province, the environmental health, and frankly, public health. You have more flooding and you have more issues with water. It becomes a more dangerous province to live in. 18% coverage, wetland and forest coverage, is what is considered safe for communities to exist in for water management and many other things. Southern Ontario currently has less than 5%, about 3% coverage. So we're not just about protecting what little things that we have left. We actually need to reverse the damage that we've already done, and then ensure that we have the capacity to face the dangers that are coming with climate change. And one of the questions was, what do you think is the greatest challenge we're going to face? And it is absolutely the climate emergency. Because what was sufficient before is going to be, or maybe insufficient, is, and I said this in the chat, is going to be woefully inadequate going forward. The changes that are going to come because of this, there's this kind of tipping point, this point of no return, where you, I think, understand too much almost, or it becomes a bit hard to kind of wrap your head around the significance of the things that will happen, and you know, some of them will happen in my lifetime, a lot more of them will happen to my children. And so as we look forward and we have these conversations about the importance of water as a human right, water having legal protections under the law, I think that's really important. And the role of Indigenous peoples, the idea that their knowledge and their understanding and their kind of the seven generation consideration that they bring to their decision-making process, and, you know, consensus-based decision-making process is how we need to approach policy. We need to build policy that is for our grandchildren, and it's not necessarily for what we get to do in the next year or what we get to build in the next year or 2 years. And I said this a bit in my initial speech, but what we need to do for the next 7 generations ahead of us, because that is going to be our legacy. And if we don't take that into consideration, it will be very difficult. I don't want to, you know, be part of that if we don't have those solutions in place, or at least do everything that we can to see that level of consideration. And I will just end by saying that I think it is really, really, really important that you do invite Indigenous knowledge to the table when you're talking about water protections, because they have incredibly valuable knowledge. But what's more important than inviting them to the table is giving their opinions or their recommendations legal status. If we want to have nation-to-nation negotiations and understanding, we need to not just listen to them, we need to act on them, and that needs to be legally binding. The recommendations need to shape the future of this country in a meaningful way, and they need to be enshrined in legislation. So thank you very much, everyone. Thank you to the other contributors. It's a pleasure to hear your opinions, and thank you to everyone who put messages in the chat and participated in this.
Thank you to Mr. Arthur. I appreciate your perspective and your participation very much. And so now over to Minister Yurek, if I can find that tab, or if you're still there, Minister Yurek, to click on the tab that says share mic and video. Okay, there you are. Thanks very much, Ian Arthur. So I just want to draw your attention again to, do pay attention to the chat. There's more developments there. What I think, you know, my bias, interesting comment from Rod Whitlow again, that connects permits to take water and fees collected from that to First Nations drinking water. That's a pretty interesting comment. There's a very direct question for the Minister for now or for another time about the Black River Watershed in Ramura Township. It's Maurice McMillan's. Minister might want to look at that at some point. But again, this is really open forum, and bring our minister back and to hand over the floor. You there? Here you come. So thank you very much, and you have up to 3 minutes for a closing comment, Minister Yurek.
Great. Thanks, Rob. And again, thanks the Wellington Watchers for inviting me here today. It's great to read the comments on the side there, and I always enjoy listening to other members of provincial parliament on their thoughts and ideas, and do often reach out to Mike from time to time to get his opinion on certain environmental issues. So it's been quite a interesting time as we move forward. Thought I'd touch on a few topics that, of course, were mentioned, and of course, this is always going to be ongoing. With regards to conservation authorities, we've wrapped up our 3 or 4 month long consultation across the province on what the future of conservations would hold. And it was a really interesting process. We had tables of every part of the spectrum on their thoughts on conservation authorities sitting around and having those conversations. And it's really interesting that actually when you sit down at a table with those that don't necessarily share your view and opinion and explain to one another your thoughts, a consensus can actually grow as to where we should be headed in policy. And those ideas will be coming forth when we bring forth the results of our consultations on conservation authorities later this year. I do want to just note that our excess soil regulations were put in place late last year, and they continue to be rolled out. So I invite those to take a look at those regulations and comment as you see fit through my ministry. And again, another comment I saw in here is regard to the circular economy and producer pay, and we have moved forward with those consultations, draft regulations for transitioning the recycling program in the province to a producer pay model. Will be posted later this fall as well for comment. We'd like to ensure we have proper time to comment so we can finalize those regulations sooner than later, so that municipalities and Indigenous communities have the opportunity to prepare for the coming changes, which will ensure that the costs of our recycling programs are shifted to the producer to help create that circular economy, and that the transition is smooth, and we are able to expand recycling opportunities through rural and northern communities and all Indigenous communities. So everyone has the ability to help reduce the waste going in the landfill, which could be utilized otherwise through a circular economy. Lastly, as I've stated always, I'm open to working with all members of the legislature. The Green Party has an environment plan that we often look at and have discussions on. When the other parties come forward with their environment plans, more than willing to sit down and have conversations with them, because that's how we glean solutions, is solution-based, outcome-based ideas coming forward. I sat on the opposition bench for 8 years, and it's easy to point out the failures. It's harder to point out the way forward and have a plan that's cohesive and going forward. So I really look forward to continuing to improve the strength of our environment throughout the province, and utilizing some of our environmental programs going forward to help us out of COVID-19. Looking forward to our hydrogen strategy coming out later this year. We've had clean tech proposals coming forward, and of course working in our waste and landfills. So thank you again for having me here today to listen, read your thoughts, and appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Mr. for your participation here and for your work for us in the portfolio minister of the Environment, Conservation and Parks. We really appreciate your comments here. And folks, you heard it here. All parties are all in and collaborating towards protecting water in the future of Ontario. So that's the good news. I think it's really appreciate the comments in the chat as well. Thank you for tuning in.